guys, shout out to Ryan Louie, one of our subscribers to Illingworth Chess, for suggesting this fascinating topic of Sergey Karjakin playing Blitz chess. But in this game, he's not going to be our hero. Our hero is going to be Vladislav Artemiev, one of the leading experts in the Nimzo Larsen, which is how the game began with knight f3, d5, and b3. And he actually takes down Karjakin in this game from the 2019 World Blitz Championship in Moscow. I want to point out that actually the move what I recommend for my repertoire, the tricky knight f3 repertoire, is to play the move e3, and then if black goes c5, we're going to play b3, and it's actually going to transpose back into the game after knight f6 and bishop b2. I'll include a link in the description below for those who do want to have access to the full course, but this video serves as a free sample if you guys get a taste of the power of the tricky one knight f3 repertoire, and how it can even cause problems to the best chess players in the world. So the game went b3, which does give black some extra options, but in the game, black didn't make use of them. You know, the reason I prefer to play e3 and move 2 is it gives you some option to go c4 and kind of avoid the lines where they develop the bishop to f5 or g4, which can be very, very solid for black. But after the move c5, we're back to where we want with e3. And now the move knight to c6 is kind of a natural developing move, but I think it gives white what he wants, and instead a move such as e6 would certainly be a lot more solid. You know, even g6 is more solid than knight c6, I think, going for a Grunfeld-style setup in that case. But I mean, you can still play c4 and still get very similar play to what I cover in the tricky one knight f3 repertoire, where I go deeper into knight c6, takes, and you know how these positions play out with bishop b5, castles d4, and this sort of thing. Actually, the move I cover is a little bit different in that course, but it's kind of a similar sort of plan for white. But instead, black plays the move knight c6, and now we pin the knight with bishop b5. Okay, what opening does this remind you of, guys? Well, it reminds me personally of the Nimzo Indian with cards reversed, and we played it with a Queen's Indian style setup, b3, bishop b2. But in the extra tempo is very useful, and if you play a move like e6 as black, you're letting white double those pawns, and those pawns can be quite a big weakness in the middle game. You could put the knight on e5 and just have a very harmonious setup where black's bishops don't really do that much without a clear way to open up the center. So Karjakin plays bishop d7, breaking the pin, avoiding the doubling of the pawns. So white just castles. And after e6, this is where we have a big crossroads in this position. There are a lot of ways that you could play it. And actually in the game that I originally planned to cover, I was going to look at the move of c4, which is sort of trying to hit the pawn from the flank and pressure that way. But I ultimately concluded that after d takes c4, I think that this position, white definitely can try to claim some sort of pull with the central majority here. But black does seem very solid. I think it's not that easy for white to prove a real advantage in these lines. Also, a move like, let's say, bishop takes c6, like if you do this, you know, you do get the knight to e5, but I've sort of concluded that by playing queen c7 and just developing normally, that you can sort of kick the knight out of e5 and more or less equalize gradually here as black. So, while I can still play this way as white, I ultimately decided to cover the move Artemiev played with d4. Now, d4 might seem a bit strange. You know? Some of you guys might notice a similarity between this and the Colle-Zukertort setup, where the bishop would normally be on d3. But there are some subtleties here, where having the bishop on b5 is not all bad. Because you see in the game, black played the move a6. You're probably playing rook c8 until keeping the tension might have been a better try, but it doesn't overly change the nature of the play, to be honest. You can still go knight d2, a3 and play in a very similar way to what we'll see in the game. But Karjakin played a6, and that kind of plays into Artemiev's hands. Because now after bishop d3, what we might notice is that, yeah, black, compared to a normal, let's say, Colle-Zukertort, he got in the moves a6 and bishop d7 for white tempo. But neither of these moves are particularly useful. Like, a6 doesn't really do all that much, and bishop d7, it's kind of a passive square for the bishop compared to fianchettoing it on b7. So, in a way, Karjakin's been a little bit move-ordered here. And after cd4 and ed4, we see that white is perfectly primed to jump a knight to e5, go f4, and just have a very strong attack against the king for when black castle's short, which is actually what happened in the game. You know, you could consider g6 to try to shut out the bishop, but it's very slow and I think not really worth it, and can still play a similar way to how Artemiev did in the game with a c4 to take the initiative in the center. Well, black played bishop d6, and white played a3. I mean, the idea is to avoid knight b4, but given that you can always kick the knight away with a3 anyway, I'm not sure if it's really worth it to avoid this move. I think that you could have just played c4 directly, put that knight on c3 and just start to put some early pressure on the pawn. That's the way that I would have played it if I was white. Just develop the pieces as quickly as possible. Also, another good thing about c4 is that in some positions you can also go c5 and kind of transform the structure so you really get a nice queenside pawn majority, where it's not that easy for black to get counterplay in the center when we're able to have a very good grip over the e5 point. But okay, the game went a3. Artemiev decided not to play the move c4 yet, and maybe you want to keep the idea of jumping knight to e5 in reserve without releasing the tension in the center. Black can play a move like b5, and you do get some queenside space, but it's not that clear what the follow-up is. It's kind of like, okay, you've shown me your hands, but you still can't do anything with them as such. Kind of like, the 100-day-old chicken. Well, I mean, why can't you just play something like rook e1? You could also play a move like queen to e2, put the knight on b e5 and f4 is the plan you're typically going for. And once you get that, you can easily do things like swing a rook over to h3, play g4, g5, and the attack really does play itself because white has a very stable hold over the center here. So, in any case, knight e7 was Karjakin's attempt to defend, not just to bring the knight over, but he also had this idea that after the move knight e5 that was played, maybe queen e2 is a bit more flexible, but okay, Artemiev played knight e5. And so now black played the move bishop b5, which strikes me as a little bit of a provocative move, because when you play bishop b5, obviously the idea is that you want to trade off the bishop so that your king is not coming under a big attack, but you're also provoking white into playing this move of c4. And it's a move that white kind of wants to play anyway, because you are getting the space in the center. And after b takes c4 and b takes c4, an important point to understand is that black is actually not in time to play bishop e5 and try to win a piece, because after d5, black's not in time to play queen takes d3, unfortunately, because we have a little intermezzo here. We can play the move e takes f6, hitting the knight, hitting the bishop, and white is just going to be a piece ahead when the chips land, as it were. So therefore, black had to retreat the bishop. Maybe e8 is a better square, just clearing c6 for the knight and keeping that c file open for the rook maybe, but it's a tough position anyway. And after bishop c6, white played a move knight c6, which at first glance might seem like a mistake. I think definitely a move such as queen c2, for instance, is a lot more natural, where you just connect the rooks. That sort of signifies you've already entered the middle game. Once your rooks are connected like this, you've got a nice battery hitting the pawn on h7, which, by the way, is the reason why it's too early for black to take e5, because then we'd be able to take back, and after knight moves, we'd be able to take that pawn with a tempo, which is kind of annoying from black's perspective. Of course, black's not forced to play bishop b5, but then white can sort of just play like knight c6 or even f4, and just have an absolutely dominant space advantage and attack on the black king in the long term. But okay, knight c6 is a more positional approach, saying, okay, I'm not going to let you play bishop e5, Mr. Karjakin. I know you're the Minister of Defense. If I go for all that attack on your king, you're just going to put the wall up and I'm not going to be able to get through. It's like bang my head against a brick wall, or something like more bombing your head to heavy metal. But in any case, we see that Artemiev decides to cash his chips in. And I think that's actually quite a good move, because after knight f3, we see that white's got the space. He's got the bishops. And if we want to stretch it a bit, he's even got ideas of rook b1 and try and attack that little weakness on b7. It might be an inch, but Artemiev takes a mile, as we see in this game. Black played the move rook to c8. The computer has a very radical idea of playing b5 and sacrificing a pawn in order to get the d5 outpost for the knight. It's not the worst idea to try to change the trend of the game when you're in a bad position, because your opponent might find it a bit hard to adjust to some change in circumstances, and that might give you some chances to save yourself. But okay, Karjakin played rook c8, which is a pretty natural move, rook in the center. The problem that we're going to see here, though, is that natural moves are not really enough for black, because fundamentally he's just got too many strategic disadvantages for him to be able to sit and hope that he can just hold the draw with a fortress. As Magnus Carlsen likes to say, I don't believe in fortresses, but maybe if he'd played rook e8 and brought the bishop that way, that might have been a better attempt at a fortress. The bishop might look nice on b8, trying to tee up some queen e6 and battery, but with the knight covering h2 and covering d4, there's just no counterplay to speak of for black. I mean, if you play bishop a7, white can just actually ignore the threat on the pawn. You can play the move rook a d1. I'll just show you guys why, to make sure that every person here is on the same page. The point is that if black does take on d4, we go captures, 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 and after captures on d4, we have the nice discovery, bishop h7, and we just win the queen like that. King h7, rook d4. So yeah, that's the reason why black's plan of pressuring the pawn doesn't really work out in this case. But the thing is, if you don't do something, at some point White's going to play a move like d5 and just bring the bishop, potentially bring a rook to life when we get to d1. In fact, at this position, I think White's already technically winning, which might seem a bit surprising to most people. Like, material is equal, like, okay, White's better, but surely it's not over. But at this level, I think it's very hard for Black to defend. After rook d7, Artemiev played bishop c2, just lending a bit of extra support to d5 by clearing the bishop out of the way. If you want to play a move like g3 and just kill the bishop and just slowly improve the position, maybe a bishop b1, queen c2 batteries, yeah, that should be pretty strong as well. Like, if you get that battery and then d5 and bishop f6, you can sort of see that while it's a lot of moves in a row for White, that we are getting some pressure against h7, and it's not that easy for Black to defend against this. Well, the game saw bishop c2, and after bishop a7, so Karjakin is desperately trying to pile the pressure on d4. There's a lot of good ways to deal with this. Is White, probably whatever move you come up with to defend is a good one. Personally, if I was White, I'd probably go for the move d5. The point being that it looks like a pawn sack, yeah, but after cd5, if Black does play knight takes d5, or we can play moves like queen c4 and then swing the queen over to so we're like g4, hitting the pawn on g7, and yeah, you're giving up a pawn, but it turns out that this pin is not that easy for Black to get out of. And if you play a move like knight b6, then again, there's moves like even queen e4, where we're threatening the mate, and with g6, bishop b3, we can kind of just pile everything on this square or build a battery on the long diagonal. So like, if you get a queen on c3, that's basically just mate on g7. And even though it's going to take some time, Black's not really in a position to defend, and the bishop's all just raking the board like a farmer here. In any case, that's a little bit advanced, and the move that Artemiev played of bishop a4 is also pretty good here. Though I do think that if Black had played the move rook d6, he's still in the fight. I mean, the threat to d4 should not be taken lightly here. And if we go c5, we do shut in the bishop, but we also give a square for the rook. So, I mean, White's better, but it's by no means all over. And if we do take c6, I mean, you do manage to win a pawn, but I think that might not be the best move, because I do think that in this case, Black will... Well, actually, you don't win a pawn, it turns out. I stand corrected, because you have bishop takes c5, and the pin is actually going to be kind of annoying. Okay, I guess White is still a pawn up, but after bishop d6, Black does get pretty good compensation, where it can pile a lot of pressure on a3, and we see that this pawn is kind of also getting in the way of all these pieces, what I like to call the traitor pawn, the traitor in the ranks, as it were, stopping all these pieces from living the good life. Well, anyway, this is a little bit long-winded. Basically, the main lesson to take is don't grab the pawn on c6, but play like bishop b3 and just keep the pressure with the bishops instead is the way to play it as White. But instead, Karjakin thought he could play knight d4, and okay, it's an exchange sack and not the worst try in the world, but I don't think it really works. After knight d4 and bishop d4, I mean, if Black was able to, say, put a pawn on e5 and maybe get a knight to g4, then yeah, you got some counterplay on the dark squares, but a player as strong as Artemiev is not going to give you that breather. Actually, what would be the move that you would play if you were White? This is kind of a critical moment in the game, and it's the part where we separate the boys from the men. So what would be your move with White to play? I'm going to have a refreshing drink of Vietnamese water while you pause and think about your move here. Okie doke. So the answer is that we play the move queen to d2. To be fair, queen d3 is also probably working, but queen e2 is a bit more precise, because now if they play a move like e5, which maybe was what you were thinking would just defend the bishop, well, then we go bam, rook takes e5, and we use the pin to our advantage. Bishop takes, runs into queen d8, and they can't take back because rook d8 is a back rank checkmate, folks. So instead of that, Karjakin had to try something else. He played a move bishop b6 to defend his queen and the bishop. But after queen takes d8, we see that this ending is basically close to winning for White. After rook b1, White is up the exchange for a pawn, and with these open files, the rook is just way better than knight and pawn at this point. If you try to defend a move like b6, I mean, it defends for the moment, but after bishop c6, we see the bishop is really dominating the black knight. And even a plan like sort of pushing c5 or a4, a5, it's going to give you the open files for the rooks. Potentially, it'll give you a passed pawn on the queen side. And all that adding up is just going to be enough for you to win the game. Again, it's by accumulating the advantages accountant style. I mean, you might have thought that accountancy was boring, but in chess, it's a key way to win games, to accumulate more and more advantages or more assets until we can cash in for the big payday. Well, the game saw bishop c7. White played rook e to d1. We had rook b8, a4. And after king f8, a very nice move by Artemiev, realizing that, okay, the one thing that's bad about my position in theory isn't my c4 pawn is isolated. So let's just liquidate it with the trick c5. These little tricks again what separate the boys from the men, or the men from the boys, whichever you prefer. Now at this point, Karjakin's best try is to play king e7 and get the king into the action, but up c takes b6, like, it's very nice for white to be able to trade off the rooks like this. Because these rooks, if you have two of them, one of them ends up being a little bit superfluous in the end. Whereas now we're the only one with the rook's power. And when moves like, let's say, even just king f1, for example, or rook to c1, now we're going to penetrate with the rook to attack the bishop and the pawn. And black can try to mount a defense. Obviously, Karjakin being the Minister of Defense would try for a while. But yeah, eventually he would lose this most likely against a player of Artemiev's caliber. But instead the game ended more quickly with b takes c5. And here's where Karjakin resigned without waiting for white's next move. Why? Well, because this is a blunder by black. Though it is true it kind of sort of black's losing anyway. It's not a big blunder, but the point in that is rook takes b8, bishop b8, and now a little fork with rook to d8, and we'll be dining on bishops tonight, folks. So yeah, that's the way that the game could have ended. Do make sure to comment below with what you guys learned from this video. You know, I do read the comments and try to reply to as many of you guys as I can. Also, make sure to like. That way I know when you smash that like button, it helps me out, and I know to make more videos like this. Speaking of which, finally, make sure to subscribe to my channel, Illingworth Chess, as well. That will make sure that you get access to more of my Grandmaster videos to keep update with your daily fix of chess improvement material. Or if you're just here, like, just to be entertained and laugh at my jokes off, that's perfectly cool as well. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.